Good morning to this, the third meeting of 2013 of the Europe and External Relations Committee. Can make the usual request that all electronic devices, mobile phones are switched off as they interfere with broadcasting. And moving on to agenda item 1. Agenda item 1 is to seek members' agreement to take agenda items 6 and 7 in private. You can see for your agenda that these are our country plans and our EU Commission work programme. Are members content to take agenda item 1 in private?
Agreed, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we have a bit of change of plan this morning. Our guests, witnesses that we're expecting along have been held up slightly. So with committee's agreement, I would like to postpone agenda item 2 until their arrival and move on to agenda item 3. Are people content to accept that? Yep. Thank you very much. The clerks will keep us informed when our witnesses arrive. Agenda item 3 is the foreign language learning in primary schools inquiry, which we're currently undertaking. My colleague and our committee member Claire Adamson MSP and myself attended St Elizabeth's Primary School in Hamilton on Friday the 25th of January. And we've got some feedback. And before I go into that, we can talk a bit about what happened on the day. It was Burns Day when we arrived, so the children were not only giving us a demonstration of their fantastic command of Spanish and other languages, they were giving us a fantastic display of their knowledge and understanding of Burns and Old Scots as well. So a very, very multicultural day. And I think I'd pass on to my colleague Claire to give you her. I know St Elizabeth's very, very well, so it would be nice to hear from Claire on her experience and understanding how the day went.
Well, I think I would first like to give my thanks to St Elizabeth's, to the head teacher, the staff, the pupils, the parents and carers who were involved in the event. It was a whole school event, it felt like to us, with a great deal of interest shown by everyone that we met in what we were there to do. And what I really liked about it is we had a tour of the school, and one of the pupils took me round. But it gave me an opportunity to see quite an age range of the pupils. We started in primary 1, so what they were doing there in Spanish, and moved through to the senior school, where really Spanish was being incorporated into normal games. It was part of the literacy and the numeracy teaching of what was going on in the classroom, and it seemed to be really embedded in what they were doing. So it was a really useful visit and a fantastic experience. I would say, you know, wonderful school, and the pupils were a real credit to everyone who's been helping them.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree and echo all of those comments and give my thanks to the head teacher and all of the teachers and the parents and the children. The stars of the day were the children. The motivation and the excitement that they demonstrated in every single exercise they took part in, whether it was a game, whether it was mathematical skills, whether it was language skills, and whether it was just welcoming us in Spanish in the morning. Very motivated and excited young people, very, very engaged, a very highly motivated and trained group of teachers too. And again, a clear demonstration that with the right leadership in a school, they don't need millions of resources. You know, if they get, you know, the value and the input from continuous professional development, then you could see how the school would grow. We spent a bit of time in the staff room with the teachers, very informally, and some of the sharing of resources that went on was very, very impressive. There was a number of research topics. There was language professors at universities that they were linked up with via Skype, where children could ask questions of culture and language. So very, very impressive indeed, and a clear demonstration of the benefit that the young people were having from it. Again, you know, extremely positive. We're happy to take any questions from members. Jamie's champion. Jamie?
Yeah, I just wondered, it's obviously it was a great trip and very interesting experience to go to that school. What in regard to the actual language, you know, the inquiry we're doing into languages, they were specialising that school in Spanish, were they? And had the Had the children learnt Spanish at primary school before they... I mean, that is a primary school, obviously.
Yeah.
But, I mean, are they going to go on doing Spanish at the next schools they go to from there?
That's one of the things that they've got in South Lanarkshire, is they do have a continuation of the language skills. So Spanish is one of the strongest ones, so children learn that from primary 1 right through. The other language that the children were learning was French, and we met the French tutor who talked about, you know, the links between Spanish and French, and how you know, learning one can predispose you to being a bit better at learning the second one as well. So they've got a very clear path there in the language that they want to speak and the set of languages they want to speak, but they also offer other examples and experiences. And one of the things that did come about from the meeting with the parents was that they were going to start an after-school club and look at some other languages too for the parents to learn, so that they can understand and help their children with the language homework when they come home. So there was a real community spirit there again, but a real willingness to look wider than the scope.
So from that school, where will the majority of pupils go to from there?
They would go to Holy Cross Secondary School, so they do Spanish in Holy Cross.
Yes, so and they're sort of geared to take that on, aren't they? Yeah.
I think Spanish and French were the strongest ones, but there was other languages that children were interested in, yeah. Holly?
Thanks, Claire. Is there any engagement with the children, with Spanish children, either, you know, using technology like Glow and Skype and so on and so forth, so that they get a direct exposure to the Spanish language being spoken by children of a similar age and so on? Do we use that kind of technology in schools, do you think, and did they use that at St Elizabeth's? Are they able to use that at that school?
They were talking about some of the projects that they were trying to get set up and running in working in this way, and it was a real priority for the teachers to actually get that link going. So they were working towards that, and they have used technology in other areas, in science, and I know the curriculum director, whose name I can't remember, the support teacher who was there, he was very keen to do the linking, and it was pointed out to us, I think, by Luca Tomasi when he was there, that Scotland being such a small country, there are actually as many primary schools in Paris as there are in the whole of Scotland, and so there are huge opportunities for every primary school in Scotland to be able to work towards making those links, and that was a real ambition of the people who were involved in the project.
Super.
Could I make one other point, Christina, before we move on? It may be of interest to the members is that I was able to visit classes where the teacher had been through the training in delivering the languages, and also visit a classroom where the teacher hadn't been through the training but was still managing to deliver the Spanish training through the support of her colleagues. And although she was, you know, there was a plan to get every teacher through that programme, it didn't seem to be a huge barrier to actually being able to take forward the process, and the teacher was expressing her delight at how much her pupils had taught her about it and kept her right and what was going on, and that was really interesting to see. But so although the objective is to get every teacher trained, not everyone in that school was.
Jamie?
Did they think, I mean, when you spoke to the teachers, did they think that it was necessary for them to have a language qualification?
I don't think well, it depends what you mean by language qualification. I think
to have a qualification in speaking a language at a certain level.
I don't know if it was speaking a language. I think what the teachers wanted was the pedagogy of how to teach language, which didn't seem to be necessarily mean that they needed a skill in a particular language. It was the technical teaching skill that they were interested in.
Okay.
Was there any advice offered by either, you know, the teachers, even the parents, or even the children for us in getting this policy right for Scotland's children in the future? Any advice and tips that we should be mindful of?
I think, I mean, the children absolutely loved it, and they felt, you know, incorporating it into other lessons that they had, incorporating it into games. You know, they've got games laid out in the schoolyard that some of the kids, now the teachers maybe on playground duty or hearing the kids, doing the counting and the colours and things in Spanish and in French. So, incorporating it into their everyday life was something that the kids felt really helped them pick up the skills. Certainly the teachers felt that was very helpful as well. And, we were going up and down the corridors and kids were saying good morning and other kids were saying hola and other kids were saying buenos dias. So they were all using different, their own style, and the confidence, and that was the main thing, was the confidence that the children had and just being very, very relaxed about it. And not really thinking too much about, whether they were pronouncing it right, to be honest. But just that confidence, and the teachers and the parents said that if they build that confidence into the kids, then the actual learning part of it becomes a bit easier because they're keen and they're happy to do it. So even the quietest children in the class I was watching, there was a game that I was watching, even the quietest kids that maybe are not the ones that would put themselves forward were still getting involved in the game because they had that confidence in that particular subject. Hanzala.
I wonder if, I know that students, I won't call them kids because they're all students now, I'm sure the young students probably didn't make any claims on resources. I'm wondering whether the staff and parents suggested that there may be an element of a resource implication in all of this. I know many of the schools so far seem to be managing with the current facilities that they have, and they sort of jig subjects in a way that they can actually manage it. But I'm wondering, as more and more subjects are brought into the curricula, would there be an implication of a resource requirement? And if so, should we maybe indicate that to the Education Committee if that's the case?
I think certainly the parents and the teachers that we had spoken to, the teachers, the group who have been through the training, it's a 12-week training course, and there didn't seem to be much impediment to that. If you wanted to get on the course, it was made available to you, depending on staff and resources and the ability to cover classes and things. So, and there was a real willingness of the head teacher to put teachers through for that. What was really interesting is on the resourcing part of it, teachers were very, very good at looking at other ways, and a lot of it was through technology, twinning with other schools, speaking on Skype, looking at programmes that are produced in other countries that maybe are subtitled so that the pupils are hearing how the word sounds, but they're seeing written in English, and they can relate the sound and the word. Really interesting. One of the interesting facts as well about learning Mandarin, which they didn't do there, but I had a conversation with a teacher, was that some young people with dyslexia actually found learning Mandarin much easier because it's a symbol and a sound language. And it seemed to lend itself much easier to how maybe a child with dyslexia would learn. So from a resourcing point of view, that teachers will always say they want more resources, but they certainly didn't raise it as a real matter of concern with us that day. The same as the school that we visited in Dalmarnock, Hanzala. They felt a bit extra money to get the CPD and get everybody on the 12-week course, and then they could, manage it from there.
I have to say that that's quite positive so far. I'm just reluctant that there may be an element of shyness with people to come forward and say, well, there is a need, particularly for training. I think training is always a very valuable commodity, and to expect schools to meet that from their own budgets, I think, would be a bit much. I'm just wondering whether we can come have some sort of consultation in the cost element itself, because if we're going to encourage people to introduce languages in schools, and we're also going to encourage them to try and have clusters in which the same language is spoken at primary and then on to secondary, then it does become an issue about resourcing, because previously at secondary schools may have taught other languages, and because the primary schools are now coming on board and doing what they can with the limited resources that they have, there may be that element, and I think we need to be careful that we don't undermine that progress just because of a small amount of resource. So I think we need to identify is there a resource element, and if it's required, and if so, how do we then assist people in tapping into that resource?
Okay, Jenny's just reminded me at the next meeting, Hansala, we have the local authorities here, we have COSLA. That's maybe a question we should ask of them. On the 18th of April, we will have the Minister here. So again, resourcing would be a question that we could direct there. The only thing I would say is the actual pilot scheme has been funded, I think, to the tune of £4.2 million. Is that?
No, that's for next year.
That's for next year. Yeah. That's for next year. So there is a bit of resourcing coming in, but certainly that's questions we should ask for the local authorities and the ministers and see what their thoughts are.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
So I think it was maybe worth mentioning that in the course of the visit it did transpire that there is no audit of who is qualified across the local authority, certainly for South Lanarkshire, for this school was, and that there may have to be a bit of work done in actually establishing what level of qualification is out there in our primary schools.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We will move on to agenda item 2, which is a continuation of our foreign language learning in primary schools. If we can have our witnesses. Agenda item 2 is to hear further oral evidence on the committee's languages inquiry, as I said, and we have a panel of experts today representing European and international perspective on the topic, and we'll give you a few minutes to get yourself comfortable. Can I welcome you all to the European External Relations Committee on behalf of the committee. We're delighted to have you here. With us today we have Lloyd Anderson, who is the Director of the British Council in Scotland. Good morning. Luca Tomasi, the Policy Officer, Directorate General for Education and Culture at European Commission. And Angeliki Petrus, Language Officer, Director General for the Translation, European Commission Representative in the UK. And we have Francis Christensen, the General Manager of Confucius Institute in Scotland. And you would have just heard me talking about Mandarin, So can I thank you all, because you've provided with some written evidence too. I'm going to go straight into questions from our members this morning. We have a number of questions that cover different aspects of our inquiry, but if there's anything that you think that we should know, please just let us know when you're answering another question. That would be very helpful. I'm going to go straight into the first question from my colleague Jamie McGregor.
Thank you very much, Convener. In our meeting of the 24th of January here, academics highlighted that teacher training abroad is very different. They gave as an example the fact that Spanish language teachers who learn English, they learn English at a degree level before they teach it. And my question really is, in what ways does the training of language teachers differ in other countries to the practice in Scotland?
In many ways. Thank you for inviting us, first of all. There is a wide range of teacher training in the European Union, especially as far as primary pupils are concerned. And the debate is the same as in Scotland. I read the papers from your previous meetings, whether it should be generalist teachers or specialized teachers teaching languages to the pupils in primary school. And of course you have advantages and disadvantages in both solutions. Meaning, in theory, ideally, it would be great to have generalist teachers being able to teach languages, being fluent in several languages in addition to the main language of instruction. As a matter of fact, this is not always the case. So it is easier to bring in specialized teachers, and you have to cope with this. But ideally, the generalist teacher should at least be able to show to the pupils that he or she can also speak other languages, because the main teacher is also a powerful role model for the pupils. And if the pupils are asked to learn French or German or Spanish and see that their own teacher is not able to do so, this is a very negative message we are sending out. So there is no ideal solution. I think in Europe nobody has found the solution for language teaching to pupils in primary and for teacher training. A combination of initial and in-service training for generalist teachers accompanied by language assistants or specialized teachers is generally what is used.
Thank you.
We've got Claire Adamson with a supplementary on that topic, yeah?
It was really just about the use of foreign language assistants in the primary school and how that might help some of the issues you've just talked about. If a teacher doesn't have the language skills themselves, how would foreign language assistants be able to be used in that context?
Thank you for inviting me. Can I just preface it with some points about British Council Scotland's work, because I'm not an expert in the provision of modern languages in schools. But the British Council is working to connect Scottish schools to schools around the world to enrich education, promote global citizenship, and to build international trust and relationships. In 2011-2012, I think there were 1,000 international school partnership projects in Scotland, so we were reaching about 24% of Scotland's schools. British Council Scotland manages the Foreign Language Assistance Programme and also the Fulbright Teacher Exchange on behalf of the Scottish Government. And British Council is the co-founder with the UK Department for International Development of the Global Education Programme for Schools Connecting Classrooms. We also deliver the EU-funded school linking programmes, Comenius and eTwinning. And in a way, we're trying to do two things: to use our global work in education policy and reform to promote Scotland's excellence in education, as well as to offer opportunity for Scotland to learn from others. And an example of that would be that we recently took people from Education Scotland to participate in a conference on learning for the 21st century in Beijing in November 2012. Coming to the foreign language assistance, the programme really provides opportunities for young people to work as language assistants in the UK and in 14 other countries. And it's the aim is to improve both the language ability of the assistants, so these are the students from abroad who are coming here, and obviously the students in the school, because they're being exposed to a native speaker. But I think importantly for us, it isn't just about language, it's also about cultural awareness, and these foreign language assistants bring their culture, their perceptions, their history and geography with them, and so that enriches the experience of kids in Scottish schools. In the current school year, Scottish schools are hosting 69 foreign language assistants, which is an increase of 11 in comparison to previous years. And if you just want a quick breakdown of those foreign language assistants, 5 are teaching Chinese, well 6 if you include the independent schools, 38 French, 10 in German, 2 in Italian, and 13 in Spanish, so that's the total of 69. And they're spread across Angus, City of Edinburgh, East Renfrew, Inverclyde, North Ayr, North Lanark, Orkney, South Lanarkshire, and as I say, also the independent schools. So we think they're an extremely valuable resource. We think they should, numbers declined. So if you look 7 years ago, we were up around 300. So there's been a very marked drop. As I say, just in the last year, there's been a slight increase back to this number of 69, but it's still a very low number. And I think it works both ways. It's good for the foreign language assistant, and it's good for pupils in Scottish schools. So I think both sides win. I should just add to that, there's also the Comenius programme, because language assistants are coming into Scotland under Comenius as well. The numbers are much lower. 9 assistants this year under Comenius coming from Italy, France, Spain, Slovenia, Poland, Greece and Hungary. But that's an increase of 3 on 2010-2011 when we only had 6 assistants coming in.
Is the drop is that a financial constraint that's causing the drop in the numbers, or is it because foreign language students are choosing to go to other English-speaking countries?
No, it's a budgetary problem in Scotland. I mean, the money was ring-fenced with central government when we had these high numbers of 300 foreign language assistants, but of course the money was devolved to education authorities, and I think just with all the other pressures on their budgets, that we've seen that money drop. They're not particularly expensive, actually. A sort of £1,000 a month for a foreign language assistant. They can work in up to 3 schools. So I think they're value for money.
Maybe I perhaps add something here. Certainly. From the perspective of Chinese language provision, I commend the British Council's Foreign Language Assistant Programme, and within the network of Confucius Institutes there are a number of schemes which are seeing teachers coming to Scotland. So we ourselves currently have 7 teachers within our own institute, and they are working principally at the adult teaching level, but they do go into schools in order to try, when we do outreach days or China workshops, to stimulate interest in China, which I think the interest in Chinese language learning is there, but perhaps needs some more support. You will be hearing, I know, from the Confucius Classrooms Institute as well about their system with the Tianjin teachers. But something that's happened to me personally is a contact from Murray House students there are a good number of them here learning teaching English as a qualification. And some of these young Chinese people hold a qualification from Hanban, which is the sponsor of the network of institutes. And that qualification is a Hanban qualification to say that they are qualified to teach Chinese language and culture. And one young girl got in touch and she said, you know, I am in 5 years, over 5 years, having had this qualification and training, I am meant to go and use it, but I've nowhere to go. Can I work with you? And I just had an email from a school in Fife. So I put the 2 of them together, and she now goes there once a week for this term. She's taking another Chinese girl with her, and they're working with a class of primary 7 school children who've had no access to any Chinese language training or cultural insight into China. And there are, I think, opportunities locally to consider how we might make use of that in the primary arena. At least for Chinese language, where there's a great commitment from the young student themselves to deliver that. My concern really is at the secondary level, where the GTC qualification is a requirement. So. Okay, a couple of supplementaries. Hansala, you wanted in, I've got Rod and then Willie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was interested in the British Council's activity, particularly in regards to Scotland and support for Scottish schools. Now, you talk about 69 schools engaged in various languages, and I'm just wondering how many of them are actually twinned with schools overseas, and how many are actually twinned out with Europe? Because remember, you know, we're not only looking at European languages here. There's no mention of Arabic, Urdu, Punjabi, or Gaelic in your list of languages.
Yeah. I should make it clear that 69 is the number of foreign language assistants who came to Scotland last year. What you're referring to are covered by 2 other programs of ours, which is around connecting classrooms, which, as I mentioned before, is designed and funded in partnership with DFID and managed by the British Council. We're working in over 50 countries, and the program's offering school partnerships, professional development courses, accreditation, and the chance to share best practice. We have 51 successful schools following the second of two application rounds in the last year. If I look at the total numbers under Connecting Classrooms, there, under the original programme, there were 46 Scottish schools in partnership with one or more schools abroad. 5 Scottish schools were connected to 8 in India, 14 Scottish schools with 19 in Bangladesh, 2 Scottish schools with 5 in Afghanistan, 3 schools connected with 5 in Pakistan, 10 were connected with Poland and Spain, 5 with Mexico, and 6 Scottish schools were connected to schools in Malawi and Rwanda. Under Global Schools Partnerships, which was the other part of the programme, there are 418 Scottish schools in partnership with 418 schools abroad. 109 of those schools are with Malawi, 43 are with Kenya, 18 with India, and 21 with Trinidad and Tobago. Under the new Connecting Classrooms programme, as I say, there are now 11 new Scottish school links there, 4 with India, 2 with South Africa, 2 with Ghana, 1 with Botswana, 1 with Namibia, and 1 with Gambia. So the programme is actually connecting worldwide, and these are school-to-school links, both to encourage pupils to become aware of schools in other countries, and also for teacher exchange and teacher development.
Follow that up. So what's the resource implication? I mean, do these schools benefit from any resources from yourself or DFID in this issue? And if so, what's the overall share UK-wide in terms of Scottish engagement?
Scottish engagement in Connecting Classrooms and Global Schools Partnerships is, it's about 10%, so it's about the sort of population share. Money is given to the schools to enable the partnership to take place, and of course travel costs are funded when there are visits, and money is given for IT provision in schools to enable them to connect. So there is a direct resource available to the schools, and in fact we just recently held a meeting in a primary school in Glasgow with teachers from around Scotland, trying to encourage more schools to take part in Connecting Classrooms. I think the problem isn't one of resource, it's about time. It's that teachers, well, what I've heard is that teachers are saying there's little time for them to develop these school links out with the curriculum.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Rod Campbell.
Morning. You talked about, Mr. Anderson, about foreign language assistance being value for money, and also the budgetary constraints that have applied over recent years. Could you just give me your view as to how important you think the foreign language assistants are to the success of foreign language teaching in primary schools? A little bit more flesh on those comments.
I think they're very important for slightly sort of tangential reasons, which is that what I've seen, kids get excited and enthused by having the foreign language assistant there. So, it might be a foreign language assistant from France who's talking to them about cooking and about food and about... So it generally activates their interests in other countries, in customs, habits, culture of other countries. And I think, you can go down the route of making foreign languages compulsory, or you can decide to enthuse and engage young people so that they want to learn the language because they're interested in it. And I think that's something that uniquely the foreign language assistants can bring, is they pique the interest of the pupils in that country, and that may mean that they want to go on and learn the language of that country and at higher levels.
Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener, and good morning to you. I wonder if I could invite you to say something about the broader experience that children in Scotland may have in trying to learn another language, and comparing that with the experience that perhaps European or even Chinese children have in learning English. My view is perhaps that the exposure that European children have or Chinese children have to the English language and culture may be much greater than our own children will have immediately to European culture and language. So could you offer some thoughts on this, and if appropriate, how can we improve that in Scotland and perhaps engage parents and perhaps the use of social media and so on to assist our Scottish children to pick up another language far quicker perhaps?
Hello, thank you very much for the invitation too. Well, it's a paradox because Scottish children have a huge advantage and a huge disadvantage at the same time. Being English native speakers, you have a huge advantage because it's such a widely spoken language, so you can travel anywhere in the world with that. You can do almost everything. But on the other hand, you are less exposed to other languages. So this is why you need to put more effort into that. For instance, the language assistance, it's a very, very good opportunity. I've been in the UK for 3.5 years, so I don't have the insight, the British Council has and you have. But I was quite surprised to see that there was a big discussion about these generalist teachers and specialists in the primary. And that I was in the Language World Conference that was in Manchester a few years ago, and there was a discussion. I mean, the conclusion was that it was better to keep the generalist teacher. And a generalist teacher who has done a GCSE in French 20 years ago with a few weeks of training could do the job. And I was a bit surprised. I mean, I come from a small country. I'm a Greek native speaker. I've worked for the Commission for over 20 years, exposed in all these languages. And I feel that that cannot be enough. Cannot be enough also because what Luca said about inspiring confidence to the kids. I mean, you cannot, if you're not fluent in the language, and if you're not, you can't inspire the kids. If you do just a song in French for half an hour a week, that's not enough. I mean, this is why I think the language assistance it's a very good opportunity. Or use specialists at the same time. Students, language students, for instance, after they do the year abroad, they could come back and they could do, help the teachers, like in the language teaching, for instance. Also bringing the experience of the year abroad. And their age also is closer to the kids, so that could also, be a factor of success and create interest. So there are different ways. It's true that subtitling is another thing. Maybe, I don't know, the primary, how they can read, subtitling, but subtitling allows you to listen to the foreign language, which is a huge advantage. I remember as a kid, television, everything was subtitled in Greek. So English was there. English was there even if I had French when I was a kid. So it was there. You had you heard it. And now with the social media as well. And so social media, I know now China is going on, and so you have social media in Chinese. So you can have, groups, they can debate in French, or they can link, thanks to social media, with pupil schools in France, in Italy, in Spain, in Germany. So discuss, organize visits maybe. So this is also when they visit each other, they become friends, then they want to communicate. So there are different ways. Of course, you have to look in all these different ways, but it's true that, some effort has to be put on there, more than in other countries. Yeah.
Can I add another dimension to that? Back in November, we put out a press release about the lack of language skills limiting Scottish exports. And this was on the back of a study called Language Rich Europe, and a report that was published on trends in policies and practices for multilingualism in Europe. And there's a chapter in this report on Scotland, and it doesn't paint a very good picture. Actually, the primary schools look okay. Secondary schools, the numbers taking a foreign language have dropped. Colleges looked really woeful, and university departments were shutting. And the point was that the report was saying that Scottish employers are tending to circumvent rather than address the language skills need by saying English is enough and exporting only to Anglophone countries or those where they can easily find English speakers. So the lack of language provision was seen to be a barrier to export.
Please, can you do that? I think hopefully there's a growing awareness of the importance of European and Chinese language, particularly in the fields of science and engineering. There's going to be, and if people don't realise that now, they're going to realise it pretty soon, that our scientists and engineers, perhaps, of the future are going to need to have some kind of skill to some kind of degree in another language, either European or Chinese, and so on. What I'm trying to get at is, do you think we need to do more to encourage our communities and our parents to become involved in this process, so that the experience that our children have is not just one that's focused on the school, and that there's an additional element to it, perhaps at home, perhaps through social media and exposure to foreign language material and television, perhaps? Do we need to do more there and broaden it from the curriculum, do you think?
I think that there's a value in the community and the family supporting language learning, but I think if we rely on that, then we really are failing our young people. My understanding in China is that, and I believe also in Europe, is that language learning is much more immersive than the way that we teach it here. And we are almost tokenistic in our delivery of language provision. Definitely, I was at school many years ago, so I'm not going to cite my own experience, but when a child is trying to start learning a language, you can put them into an immersive environment and they will learn the language, but we in fact select elements of it. So the more we can do, perhaps using an appropriately qualified language assistant or qualified teacher who has a level of language to engage the children, and supplement that so that there is more through using the family and the community to create more opportunity for the language to be prevalent and in the school, rather than I've just had my 40 minutes of whichever language and that's it for the week or for the few days until the next period. Might be a way to work, but to use that as the fundamental would be, in my opinion, very wrong. I think that we are failing our children by not having suitable level of provision, and we've made steps towards that, and then we've gone backwards because there's been a lack of funding. So we've actually lost ground in Mandarin where we should have been forging forward.
Ellen. Thanks very much, Kimberly. And I was very interested when I was reading the papers last night to read about the examples of the connecting schools, and I thought that was really interesting because it struck me, it made me just think, is there a potential there for entire communities to be linked so that you get the kind of interaction that Willie Coffey, my colleague, is suggesting, that it's not just teaching in the class, but you could actually get, the wider community involved through linking with these communities, because clubs and things could potentially be set up outside the school day as well as, and that would complement the actual teaching work within the classroom. Is there a potential for that?
I mentioned that we had a meeting over in Glasgow. I think it was at Dalmarnock Primary School, and I was struck by there's a map of the world that the kids have put up on the wall with little bits of string from all the different countries to pictures of kids at the school, and so you sort of visually see the incredible range of countries that are covered by this one school: Zimbabwe, Malawi, Pakistan, India, from across the world. And I mean, they were linking with schools in France. But in a way, you're absolutely right. How do you draw in the communities that those children come from? At the moment, I mean, Connecting Classrooms is very much just concentrating on the schools and the teachers and the education. They could. I need to think about how you do that. But you can see the potential is there just by the range of countries that schools cover these days.
Yes, I wanted to add, we have a civil society platform working with the European Commission on the theme of multilingualism. And in the report they presented in 2011, they very much insisted in bringing the community into the school, especially for pre-primary and primary school. This is, of course, essential. There are so many aspects linked to languages. One aspect is growth and the economy, and another aspect is, of course, inclusion. And it is so essential for kids to see that their language, their heritage language, is valued, is not associated to stigma, is not something to hide, but rather something you can be proud of. That it is essential to also involve these community languages in the language teaching, in the holistic approach to language teaching at school. Of course, the important thing is that the teacher should be in control of all these different aspects, and native teachers of the language as language assistants are, again, essential, because if you talk French to your teacher who's English or Scottish, it is artificial in a way. You're playing a game, you're not doing the real thing, you're not communicating to the native speaker. So it is essential, again. The fact is, we should have very clear what is the objective of language teaching. And there are many interlinked objectives, which makes things more fascinating but more difficult at the same time.
Okay, I think we're going to explore a wee bit wider now, and we're back to Jamie McGregor.
Thanks, Convener. I've got a couple of questions. Can I ask them separately?
Of course you can.
The first is a fundamental, really, question. How do you think that the Scottish Government's 1+2 proposal compares to other countries, European or otherwise?
This is the multilingualism policy of the European Union. I mean, the proposal. It's a communication and it's a proposal. Of course, education is a national competence, so we cannot have any legislation imposing on member states, what to do in terms of education, but we can recommend. And the recommendation is Mother Tongue +2, and this is what is implemented now in every EU country. I mean, I don't think, is there any exception for the moment apart the UK? From the UK.
Ireland,
yeah, okay, Ireland, yeah.
Yes, of course, this is what the head of state and government decided in 2002 in Barcelona, when they asked member states to take further action to improve the teaching of basic skills, including the teaching of 2 foreign languages at least from a very early age. Fact is, the results are not that good anywhere in Europe. The results are good in some special countries like Luxembourg, by definition, because you have so many pupils coming from Portugal, maybe, Portuguese families, learning Luxembourgish and then German and then French, and then when they start learning English, it is already their 4th language. But apart from those cases, reality is not that nice. We recently had the European Survey on Language Competencies. In 2012, we published the results. Unfortunately, not all member states took part. Only England took part for the United Kingdom. And the results are not that good, both in quality and in quantity, meaning the level of these kids taking the assessment is very, very low, is what is called A1, A2 in terms of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. And then the share of pupils taking 2 foreign languages in addition to the main language of instruction is still very, very low everywhere in Europe. So we do have a problem. We must increase the number of people studying 2 foreign languages. And this is not a theoretical objective. It is essential because these people will be on the labor market for the next 40 years probably. We do not really know, whether they will need Chinese or Polish or Portuguese or Italian or what they will need throughout their work life. So we must provide them with metalinguistic skills, the ability to learn, to keep learning languages, to keep adding other language competencies when they will need them. And it is essential for that they learn more than one foreign language in order to be able to make the difference.
On that point, when you say that the Barcelona project, as it's called, doesn't appear to be working very well in other countries, is it going to be reviewed as to why it's not working?
That's a good question. One of the main reasons is that people think that English is enough. People are now realizing that English is not enough. And it is funny because even in the United States, there is a growing awareness that English is not enough, that you have to learn foreign languages for many different reasons. In the United States, there is a concern for security, first of all, because they realize they need people able to speak Parsi or Urdu or Pashto or whatever. But they also need people able to speak Spanish, to speak all languages. In New York, Mayor Bloomberg made an executive order asking the administration to be able to communicate with the millions of people in New York who are not able to speak English well enough. And they are realizing now that there is an issue there. So we are always late, a few decades late. But member states are taking measures to improve the situation because they realize that English is excellent for international meetings, is excellent if you are in an airport, but it is not enough. If you want to sell to Latin America, you have to use Spanish or Portuguese. English is not.
My second question is about skills and resources. And one of the Scottish Government Language Working Group's recommendations was that school teachers should have a language qualification at a higher level. And the Scottish Government has accepted that partially. But the British Council also highlight the decline of teacher teaching and the decline of the local authorities' support due to funding, obviously, restrictions. So my question is, should all future primary school teachers have a language qualification as recommended by the working group? And if so, at what level? And how feasible is that proposal? And how long would it take to implement if we were going to do it properly?
My answer would be yes. As they learn maths and grammar and part of the teaching program, I think they should have a language. And they should have a language, I would say, at least to C1 level. I mean, that's my personal opinion, in order to be able to teach it in school. Either alone or with the assistant, the language assistants, but as I understand, language assistants cannot be in every school. So there can be a combination of both, but the teacher needs to have, I would say, C1 level in order to teach the language. So you want to add something? Yeah.
Can I just add that you refer to British Council?
Yes.
And we think there is a lack of qualified teachers. That certainly is part of the problem. In the case of Chinese, which I think is what we were referring to then, it's also about getting it into the mainstream curriculum. And I think this comes back to Luca's point, that if you look at trade with China, it was 1992 when Deng Xiaoping sort of opened the doors to foreign trade and investment. So in 20 years, we've seen trade with China increase dramatically. So it's now the second largest economy in the world. And in a way, thinking about that in terms of languages is lagging far behind. In Scotland, I think 6% of schools are teaching Chinese, which means 94% are not. But I looked at the American figures, and they're very pleased because they've got to 4% teaching Chinese. So, you know, we shouldn't. I don't think we should beat ourselves up too much. But it's a very slow change compared to the speed at which trade flows are changing. And so we still see the dominance of French and Spanish in our languages, even though China is an important export and import destination.
If I may add a clarification, that my understanding is that the teaching of Chinese in schools to any achievable level in terms of a qualification is principally within the private sector. At the state schools, there are some which have made good progress, generally those who were early adopters of the Confucius classroom concept and managed to secure a teacher and retain at least one teacher, but they are few in number. And the numbers who were interested have dropped because there is a lack of provision of teaching in the secondary arena. So the 6% may principally relate to the private sector, and also there's a great deal of opportunity to have a flavour, a taster course. And I wouldn't count that. I don't know how it's quantified, but just as a clarification.
Yes, just to add one thing, coming back to the question how sustainable it is, how can we afford, there is of course a problem of turnover of teachers. You have to do in-service training or retraining for those teachers who are already in place. And new teachers certainly should have a qualification. A similar problem happened in Eastern Europe when the switch from Russian to English happened. All of a sudden, they had plenty of Russian teachers and they were unemployed, functionally unemployed. So they had to be retrained to teach English instead of Russian, and the results were much better, even if the teachers were less good in English, but the motivation was there for English and had never been there for Russian, of course.
Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, moving on now, Claire Adamson.
Thank you, Convener. I want to touch on an area I think Mr Tomasi, you spoke about shortly ago. It's really about getting to the philosophy of what's been proposed and the adoption of the 1+2 model. Because we have taken a lot of evidence about transition issues and also whether there should be a national strategy about particular languages. But what I want to get to the nub of is if we get the 1+2 model right in our primary schools and are delivering that well, does it stand up on its own regardless of the languages that are taught in terms of how that will improve linguistics going forward?
Well, all languages are accepted, and it depends also on the local situation. I mean, we're aware in Scotland that Scottish is important, for instance. So it depends on the language of the neighbour. It depends on trade languages. You know, every country has a specificity. On the other hand, if I put my employer hat as an EU, we have 23 official languages today, 27 member states. We'll have 24 official languages, Croatia joining in July. And we have a hard time in recruiting British citizens. The British citizens represent 4% of the EU employees, and they should represent around 14%, depending on the population. So Scotland is included in the UK. I don't have figures for Scotland because the UK is a member state. And one of the reasons is the lack of language skills. Because in order to work for the European Union, you need to have at least one foreign language. It has to be for one of the working languages. And the working languages, the internal working languages are English, French, and German, which means that a British person or a Scottish person, an English native speaker, should have French or German to a good level. I mean, be able to draft, to speak in a meeting, be fluent in French or German. If you want to work as a linguist, which means translator or interpreter or lawyer linguist, then you need 2 foreign languages. And the second foreign language can be any other official language. And there, again, we have a hard time in recruiting English native speakers. We keep organizing competitions. We don't have enough successful candidates, translators into English. So this was not the case in the 70s when the UK joined. But at the time, languages were compulsory in schools. So this is why it's so important now, you know, to have languages in the primary, because we have to start early. If the pupils are not interested in languages, it's too late when they learn maybe that there's the opportunity to work for the EU one day. It's too late. So yes, this is my double answer. You know, any language, but for us, and there are jobs there. And there are jobs, I mean, in the European institutions, and we need British people. Because education in this country is so good. I mean, they have all the skills. And it's a shame that they can't come to work with us and for us because they have the language skill, the language problem, the language deficit. And it's a shame because we need this input.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the language, the choice of the language is not so much the real issue. Because if you learn more than one foreign language from a very early age, then you're confident in you know that you can do it. I see the people, the pupils coming out of the European schools in Brussels. They are really confident. When they choose the university, they don't really ask themselves, should I go to Spain because I know Spanish, or to France because I know French. They choose all over Europe because they know even if they didn't study Spanish, they will learn it, as they have already learned French or English or German or whatever.
Gonzalo.
I was interested with your comment about employees in Europe, particularly from the United Kingdom. I mean, we in Scotland are slightly disadvantaged. We'd have to polish up our English as well. So, I mean, we're starting off from a hard place as it is. So, is there any positive action in terms of employment for citizens from member nations like the UK in terms of employment in Europe?
For the European institutions, there is a fast track now at the FCO in London, trying to train British citizens to pass the tests in order to work for the European institutions. They've done that in the past, and now there is again trying to prepare and help them be successful.
Where is that based?
It's in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in London. Have to get in contact with them. I mean, I can find out if you want.
We'd appreciate that information. Thank you.
Send that. But we cooperate. They organized a big event 2 years ago, and our director of EPSO, which is the European Personnel Selection Office, came, who is British, David Bearfield, and they invited universities also to explain, you know, what the possibilities are, and that we're lacking British citizens. And yeah.
Just add, again, slightly to one side, the British Council funded a survey by Ipsos Mori of business leaders. And I think it was a staggering 74% of business leaders said they couldn't find young people with the skills they needed to operate on an international stage. And you contrast that to surveys of the students who don't see any need to know about other countries or other languages. There's a huge gap between the supply and the demand, really.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. I heard one employer in one conference, I think it was WIG, the big telecommunications company in France, saying that they would value a candidate who has a foreign language, French in this case, to work in the UK without advertising it. It was not in the job description that you need French. And also what was interesting is that they felt he might not need French in his everyday work because he would work in the UK in a town where, you know, there are no foreigners. But the fact that he knew French means that he's more open, he's more flexible in French or any language, more flexible, more open to the difference. So he would serve better the customers because he would be more sensitive that there are differences. Because when you know foreign language, you know there are different cultures, there are different mentalities. So he would be a better employee in that way. So that was an interesting thing I had never heard before as an argument, you know, in favor of a language.
Yeah. Rod Campbell.
I'd like to talk a little bit, if I could, about the difficulties in ensuring continuity between primary and secondary schools. Do you believe that a firm link can be established between primary and secondary schools without limiting the options available as an extra language? Any thoughts on that? How do we approach continuity?
There is also always a trade-off between a broad choice of languages, offering all the languages people might ask in primary, and the possibility of sustaining that in secondary school. This must be part of a strategy. You really need a strategy, and it very much depends on whether you insist. Until recently, there was an opposition in teaching languages in primary school between those who were in favor of language awareness, exposing pupils to as many languages as possible, rather than teaching languages in a proper formal way. This was Michel Candelier against Richard Johnston, say. It is not a real opposition. You can have both things at the same time. You can expose pupils to several different languages. It shouldn't be 175 languages, of course. You're just confusing them if you do that. But you can certainly mention different languages and explain to them how different languages tend to deal with different categories, linguistic categories. It is important that languages are not dropped at the end of primary if you want to really reach a decent level by the end of compulsory education. And I think it is really a question of equity, getting at the end of compulsory education with a decent level of foreign languages for everybody. Because in all over Europe it is becoming a luxury. People who are well off can send their children to the UK or to Ireland for their holidays, can have private classes and so on and so forth, whereas the others are left to what the schools can provide. And this is rather unfair in my view. So it is essential that there is some sort of strategy between primary and secondary schooling and teaching of languages in primary and secondary school. Of course, they cannot be the same because people move around, because if you have to make choices. In one school you will only provide English, French and Spanish. In another school you will provide German and Polish or Chinese and so on. And when the parents move, you will have to adapt, to find a way of picking up what you have lost. And the same when you move from primary to secondary school, it will never be that easy, that seamless transition. But of course you should consider. I think that the reform you're planning in Scotland is excellent. This is very good news, but it should combine with something else in secondary school, of course.
Can I just add to that? The British Council submitted evidence in England, which was a consultation on a draft order making foreign language as a statutory subject at Key Stage 2. And the point they made is about the difficulties in the transition from primary to secondary school being caused by inconsistent foreign language teaching at primary level. Compulsory Key Stage 2 foreign language teaching was seen to save time otherwise spent at Key Stage 3 by any one secondary school in trying to bring all pupils up to the same standard in the foreign language to be taught at that stage. However, if foreign language teaching at Key Stage 2 is of one foreign language, this benefit isn't realized unless all pupils are going to learn the same foreign language, which wasn't being proposed. And therefore the conclusion here was that under these circumstances, the compulsory teaching of single but unspecified foreign language at Key Stage 2 would be unlikely to achieve the stated aim of easing the transition to secondary school. And the proposal by the British Council that it was, which I think is what we've been discussing more about, giving pupils at primary school linguistic ability rather than seeing it as starting a specific language at an earlier stage.
Would you think it's better to manage this transition at a local level or throughout Scotland?
In my view, it has to be managed at local level, but with a general policy for the country. Ideally, every pupil will have different linguistic needs in their further life. Ideally, every pupil should be able to progress at a different speed, taking up different language competencies. But this is something nobody can afford. I mean, it would be nice if it were possible. New technologies make this possible in some way. You can have extra teaching of languages, extra opportunities, extra exposure to foreign languages that were unthinkable 10 years ago, probably. But, of course, what you can do in the classroom is limited. So I think it is better to have a reasonable choice of languages rather than an extravagant offer in primary and then reduce into a very limited offer in secondary school.
Okay, I think I've got Jamie coming in a supplementary. Have you still got an interest there, Jamie?
Yes. Well, you talked about the Comenius assistance. How can we reverse the trend of one-way traffic of FLAs so that more FLAs come to Scotland to work rather than vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There's an awful lot of English language assistants going abroad compared to the number of foreign language assistants coming here. This is a budgetary problem at the level of the education authorities. I'm afraid they'd need to put more money up to encourage more foreign language assistants to come.
You made the point earlier that you thought that they were very good value, these
yes,
FLAs.
I do.
And everybody seems to think that this is a very good idea. So,
yes. I don't know the mechanism by which it happens, but yes, we just need to encourage those authorities to ring-fence some of their budget for this.
I'd like to add that in the new program that we are now discussing with the Parliament and the Council, which might be called Erasmus for All, the new program for education and culture for 2014 to 2020, there will be probably much more money for mobility, and this includes mobility of language assistants. Probably this could help in some way to facilitate language assistance, language Comenius assistants coming here.
Can I just come back? I mean, one way, of course, is to reverse what has happened and to bring it back as a centrally funded option and to ring fence it. That's another way of dealing with it.
Can I? Well, the other point, I mean, in some countries, language tuition starts before children go to school. Do you think there's a place for such an approach in Scotland? And do you think it's a good approach, that?
Definitely is a good approach. We published a policy handbook in 2011 on language teaching at pre-primary level. Of course, there is also always a condition. You have to approach it in the proper way. You cannot expect to teach languages in any formal way to pupils at pre-primary level. You have to involve them in games and sing songs, but the results are excellent. Of course, the younger the kids, the easier for them to learn languages. When we are born, we are able to learn all languages in a wonderful way, and then we restrict our ability to learn languages. And as we grow older, of course, we can keep learning languages as adults, but in a very different way. We learn by grammar, we learn by rules, we learn by exercise. And if we can take advantage of the ability of young people to learn languages, that's excellent. Only, again, you have to train people to teach or to help language acquisition at a very, very early age. And certainly, why not in Scotland?
Is there a simple method for parents to help in this respect?
Yes, there are methods. It is mainly a matter of motivation. The problem is that in the UK and in Scotland in particular, the common sense tells parents that we never needed languages. Why should our kids need languages? The attitudes are changing everywhere, Scotland included, luckily. But certainly parents can help a lot. The problem with parents is that if the parents don't know language, I remember I was a lecturer of Italian in Oxford some 30 years ago, and when I asked to the people in the nursery school where I put my child, what should I do for English, they told me, you shut up. We do the English teaching, you speak Italian to him. So if possible, young people should be exposed to real native speakers of the foreign language. Of course, parents can help to a limited extent if they are not fluent in the foreign language.
Helen, you've got a supplementary? Yeah?
Yes, thanks, Convener. One of the things that I wonder if the Commission has got is a register of all the funding, the applications that have come from Scotland in connection with programmes that are available to assist in the development of the sort of training that we're talking about. Is that register available that you would be able to share with us?
I must ask. I wonder, probably they are by country. I'm not sure they are by region. But I can inquire and let the clerk have it.
At the same time, when you provide that information, can you also give us funding programmes that have been applied for, that are available but have not been applied for?
Just on the funding issue, if I can ask you just a question, if you've got the answer to this, how other EU member states actually fund language learning in schools. We're obviously funded through government and local authority with partners in key areas, but maybe how a bit of an insight into how other EU states actually fund their language learning. Yeah,
language is like any other basic skill. So the way they fund maths, they fund the language. I mean, is considered a basic skill, especially English. So there's no specific funding for the language. It's part of it's considered important, so it's like the other subjects.
Until now, until the end of February, you can still apply for the key activity 2 in the lifelong learning program, for which is language specific. In the new program, there will be no language specific action. Languages will have to compete with all other subjects. Of course, the main condition is that Europe finances initiatives that have a European dimension. So it is never for Scotland or for England, but it is always a combination of different countries applying for you have beneficiaries and promoters from different countries taking part.
Thanks, but I think we've got a final round of questions from Willie Coffey.
Well, Convener, my question's been asked. I'm quite happy to leave it at that.
Okay, excellent. Any other quick questions? We're just about out of time. No? Is there anything you would like to add to
I have a list of the 30 Scottish schools that are involved in multilateral Comenius agreements, if that's of help.
What I'd like to say is my role in the UK is to promote language learning, so we liaise with different stakeholders throughout the country and to foster language learning, and we support, we work with CILT and Scottish CILT now, more with CILT in England, and also with universities, with Roots into Languages, with different organizations. We take part in fairs, we talk to kids, universities, whatever. I mean, we organize events. So I'd like let you know that we're there, and if you need support, I mean, we're happy to help.
If I may, Chinese is clearly one of the harder languages to learn. It's acknowledged in studies that it takes longer to acquire the 4 skills. And so early learning of Chinese is something that would be hugely welcomed. In terms of investment, Scotland has more Confucius Institutes per head of population than any other country in the world, funded by an offshoot of the Ministry of Education, Hanban. We have a unique position if we can garner our resources in such a way to use the Hanban resources and the commitment that has been shown to Scotland to at least bring Chinese to the level of the European languages. I think we would affect the economic future of our country greatly. Okay, can I say that thank you for your evidence. It's been very, very enlightening for us. Some of the additional information that you've offered to give us would be extremely helpful in our deliberations going forward. We have local authorities coming up soon, and we have the Minister coming later in April, so it will inform us on how we ask the questions of the people at the delivery end, and that's been very helpful, so thank you very much on behalf of the committee myself. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to take a brief 5-minute break just to allow people to get organised, and I'll see you back at 28 minutes past. Welcome back. Moving on swiftly to agenda item 4, which is our Brussels bulletin, and as usual we have Dr. Ian Duncan, who will talk us through the bulletin and then some questions from colleagues. Ian.
Thank you very much, Convener. There are 4 broad issues I want to touch upon in the bulletin today very briefly, but I've also given you an additional paper which is written by the chief economist of the European Policy Centre, who spoke to the committee previously, Fabian Zulek. I've given you this again as a taster for a paper that will be coming to you shortly, which is about the negotiations of the multi-annual financial framework. The reason why this is important is, and the title gives it away, will infrastructure and research investment be sacrificed in the upcoming negotiations? So it's worth a read of that. You will get a more thorough paper shortly, but this is just a taster to remind you again that, as you'll see in one of these, and I'm just going to read it out, France, as well as the Mediterranean and Central and Eastern European countries, benefiting from the traditionally large areas of EU spending, in particular the CAP and the cohesion structural funds, demand further protection of these areas. This form of negotiation turns the budget into a zero-sum game, and something will have to give. And the fear is that it will be the research part and the infrastructure. So something to note for things coming up. I want to touch briefly on fisheries. I'm sure you will have read in the papers again that the European Parliament's committee yesterday has reached agreement over its report into the common fisheries policy. A couple of big things to note in there: a discard ban within 3 years, which will be important. A move away from the quota allocation system toward the maximal sustainable yield approach, and a move toward regional management. Very important to note that this is only one side of the co-decision-making process. The Council is yet to come back with what it will want to achieve. And quite a few of these things seem slightly aspirational without the details. So regional management is a great title. Exactly how regional management is delivered will be the real test. And what I've done in the bulletin is I've given you little clickable links that will give you the full timetable on each of these components of the CFP as well, so you can get in if you want to dig into it a bit further. I want to touch again briefly on mackerel, and I know, Hansala, this has been an issue that you've been tracking for quite some time. There was quite a lot of interest in the press after the last meeting of this committee on this very issue, and you'll have noticed again in the bulletin that the Cabinet Secretary, Richard Lochhead, has now tried to push this issue forward by creating, if you like, or calling for an international figure to step into the negotiations. A couple of things as background. In Brussels last week, and chatting to the various people, the reality seems that nothing will happen this year. That's the feeling amongst those people who are involved in this. There are several reasons for that. One, the upcoming Icelandic election will stop things moving forward seriously. The Norwegian election back end of the year will also be a factor. As I said at the last meeting, I just want to be very clear on this, there is a bigger issue about the import of Icelandic fish into the northeast of England, and that's causing another angle to this, less into Scotland certainly, but into the northeast of England. That's a problem. And at the moment, the Icelandic fisheries minister has imposed what he's terming a unilateral cut, so matching the cut which the EU and Norway have previously agreed, which is 15%. So they're also going to impose a 15% cut in their own fishing. But, and this is why that is slightly meaningless, Iceland caught 2,000 tonnes of mackerel in 2011, 146,000 tonnes in 2012. So a 50% cut of 146,000 isn't that a significant cut, when not that long ago they caught 2,000 tonnes. So you can see immediately why there's a bigger issue here about the conservation and why the accreditation was lost from the Marine Stewardship Council, because it is no longer safely being harvested within the limits which are set by the scientists. So progress will be slow on this, I think, is a reality of it. But that's not to say that we are not going to continue to push for more information from all the people that we need to get the information from. But that's just the background from my trip out to Brussels. CAP, again, I'm not going to... Of course, yeah.
Can I actually make a comment on that? And that is, what I find ironic is that it's the Scottish fishermen and their families who made this ultimate sacrifice, lost a lot of industry in trying to save those reserves, to now being in a position where those reserves are being gobbled up by others. I think there's a moral issue here, and there's an issue here that the European Union has a responsibility to safeguard our fish. We did what they asked us to do. Now they need to do what we asked them to do, and that is to protect our stocks. And therefore, Chair, I think that this committee really needs to take some sort of action in this regards, to perhaps speak to the Cabinet Secretary to do more than just allow the European Union to allow to continue this to roll on without any end. This idea about, you know, political niceties, we'll have to swallow that pride and we'll have to deal with this issue. And if it means upsetting people, then that so be it. But we cannot afford the wholesale capture of those fish, considering we made that sacrifice in the first instance.
No, you've summed that up perfectly. That is the problem. The sacrifices made by the North East were great. They created out of those sacrifices a fully sustainable fishery to the extent that it was accredited by an international body as harvested according to these sustainable rules. And now their good work is being undone, and that is a travesty. So I think we can make more approaches to the Scottish Government, who are fully on board with this. So there's no closed door there, in that sense.
Can we also just for protocol and politeness sake, check what our other committees doing on this, because I think there's a bit of work being done there. Jamie?
Can we just on Hans Sala's point, which I absolutely agree with, surely the difficulty and it is that the sanctions would hit our demersal fishermen very hard, and hit our demersal producers, really, the whitefish producers, because so much they depend on so much whitefish coming in from Iceland and the Faroes. So if we ban that, we're going to actually cut off our own nose to spite our face.
I'm not suggesting what we suggest they do. All I'm suggesting is that we need to address it, and what measures our government deems fit and proper would be the line I would take, and not necessarily go down the ban route as such.
That's what they want. I mean, the challenge. You're absolutely right. The imports of whitefish are important to the UK. They're primarily processed in the north of England, but they are not. Most of your fish fingers are probably cod from Icelandic waters, I would imagine. Although I don't want to say that's certainly true, I'm just imagining that to be true. It's the principal export of Iceland is fish-related products and so on. The second export is raw aluminium. So it's 40% fish, 30% aluminium is the balance of exports.
Okay, Willie?
Can I just ask one more question? I'm sorry to bang on about this. You talked about the discard ban, in which everybody's been asking for, except the Scottish fishermen, who don't want a complete discard ban, do they?
I think they're fearful that if it is not implemented well, it could have perverse and unintended consequences. So, and as you will know very well, the Scottish fishermen have gone very far in this direction already with the work they've done in terms of on-board real-time cameras and recording and so on to demonstrate their efforts. So they want to make sure that the discard ban is right and functional rather than just adopted in order to get the headlines. So I don't think they're in any way against. They too see the wrongness of discards. They just want to make sure it's not a quick headline and an unworkable policy. I think that's...
There has to be some form of market for what is kept, which hasn't been kept in the past.
Yes. If you impose a zero discard, then you must land all that you harvest from the sea, and you must do something with that. And that calls into question exactly what market you would use that for. And a lot of this would then not be to the domestic consumption market. It would go to other aspects of the fish processing, meal and so forth markets. But that's an issue that has to be resolved. The hope is that by imposing such a ban, it would discourage fishermen from putting themselves in a position where they're likely to harvest too much. So as you can imagine, immediately that's very difficult to do, since you're putting a net into the water. You're not picking fish out of a tree or something. You have to be able to rely upon your own skills as a fisherman, but at the same time you can't be certain what you're pulling out of the water. So there are challenges in that. But at the moment you'll be aware that the discards figure is about 25% of the fish taken from the sea in some fisheries. So they return to the water dead.
Thanks, Convener. I hope the committee is fully supportive of our Cabinet Secretary, Richard Lockhead, in his long attempts to press the case for the Scottish fishing industry, not only in Europe but with the UK government as well. I wanted to ask Ian, though, why do we get in this position? Is there any basis, any scientific basis to justify one side of the argument against the other? I mean, it seems ridiculous on the face of it for Iceland to go from 2,000 tonnes to 146,000 tonnes in a year, and to justify that on the basis of any evidence. But they would no doubt say so. Where is the scientific basis, and is there no common framework, even within Europe and our partners in Iceland, to really establish the scientific evidence to help us to formulate policy that can be sustainable?
I imagine somebody could write a small book in answer to that particular question. If I can just roughly sketch it out, is there science to support what they're doing? No, although they would contend that their science supports it. So, whose science is bigger depends on your particular persuasion. But the big difference is that in the past, because there were literally no or very few mackerel in the waters of Iceland, Iceland was entirely indifferent to the stock and therefore did not sign up to the agreement at the time, which would have meant they were a major player in the allocation of that. They really were not bothered. And this is governed by a UN law. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea sets out this negotiation structure. What seems to have happened between about 2010 and today is that the migrating patterns of the mackerel have shifted. So whereas there were previously almost no fish in their waters, now for a certain period of the migration cycle they are in those waters. And their argument is, well, something has changed, and therefore something must be done to address this for our benefit. And you can see their logic, which is, the fish are now in their waters. The bigger issue, of course, is when the fish are in their waters, they're not at their best. So they're being harvested. There are poorer quality mackerel in their waters at that time of the year, being harvested in great quantities, flooding the market, thereby undercutting the prices with a poorer quality. So there are lots of tangles and issues within this. There's no doubt now, though, that the science certainly does not support the actions of the Icelandic fishermen or the government, that there is no science to support that level of take from the sea. And the fear is that within a very short time the stock could collapse.
Is there any, I noticed in your other comment there about our Cabinet Secretary looking for some kind of mediation to intervene. Is that progressing, and is there a basis for trying to put scientific evidence at the heart of that to persuade both parties to agree?
When the Cabinet Secretary, Richard Lochhead, made that request at the Fisheries Council last week, and there is a recognition that something must be done to try and break the logjam. The slight concern is that these other domestic issues, which will be the election in Iceland, and nothing's going to happen with Iceland before an election because no one's going to come forward and take any hits or any kind of moves in that direction. The claim at the moment is that Iceland has really done this in order to create, in a sense, a background. They've almost had a titanic fishery to harvest as much as they could, so that they could then say, we can now cut that back by 50% and still get more than they had before, but actually show it was a big sacrifice. The election in Norway will also slow things down because they also don't want to be seen to be giving anything before an election. So, to some extent, politics in other parts of the Northeast Atlantic will intervene to a swift solution. Richard Lochhead's intervention was sound and sure, and there's no doubt that that would help. But the solutions may, unfortunately, hang upon elections elsewhere.
I have to brief because my comments have largely been dealt with. But just to say, to Willie, and obviously to remind Hanzala that obviously the good efforts that Richard Lochhead has made, but when you're getting tough state to state, then that's obviously coming from the UK at the present time, and there's a limit to how much our Cabinet Secretary can actually do. Just slightly on Iceland domestic politics, matter of speculation, but are any of the Icelandic political parties likely to be giving ground post-election on it? Is that, except that speculation?
It's a challenge. I mean, the major industry of Iceland is fish, and every aspect of fish, and so it's absolutely woven through every one of the political parties. They are defenders of the fishing industry, and they would argue, and certainly with regards to their demersal, their whitefish fishing industry, it's been better than the CFP. The CFP has not been a success, as everyone's happily conceding. So it's very hard for the Icelandic fishermen to say, well, you seem to wish us to follow your own rules, which have not been that successful to date. Curiously enough, of course, the mackerel fishery is the exception to that, where it is actually successfully, sustainably managed. No one's going to give anything before the election, and after the election, the hope would be that, having had this titanic fishery, they will accept a significant cut in that, but they really want their share to be round about. The share at the moment is marginal, according to the original agreement. They would like to have about 17% of the fishery. In order to get that, primarily Scottish and Norwegian fishermen would have to sacrifice their entitlement in order to bring that about. And at the moment, the reason why progress this year will be more difficult is that the whole allocation has been allocated. So in order for that to be progressed, you would have to actually withdraw quota from people who already have it, thereby slightly gumming up the works. But that's not to say these things can't be done. It's just to say that there will be a challenge to do them.
Okay, do you want to continue on with the rest of the
Yes,
Brussels
just
bulletin and then we can
very,
come
very
to
quickly on two
questions?
things. The Common Agricultural Policy, I've put in quite a bit in there, 7,000 amendments to the original document, you'll be pleased to hear, which is quite significant. A couple of things just to draw your attention to. 25% bonus and direct payments to farmers who are under 40, trying to encourage, again, young farmers to come in, which will be quite important. Again, adjustments to the way subsidies are given to larger farms. And the important part, which often gets lost in this, which is the move toward equity between the new member states in the east and the existing member states, which, as you know, to the frustration of France, will mean that they will get less money, but the new member states will get more money. So that also has gone through. And I gave you a statistic on there where, so countries like Latvia, farmers get 33% of the EU average. So they're really getting the fuzzy end of the lolly on that one, compared to those in the West who were better at negotiating at the time. So that's something to note. One other small thing just to note again, we often have the transposition information from the Scottish Government about how well the Scottish and UK governments are doing about transposing EU law, and the Scottish Government is very good at that. Just a note here that the government in Northern Ireland have dropped the ball slightly with regards to the implementation of energy, the provisions of the EU electricity and gas market rules. But just to let you see what that looks like when you do it, the Commission requests that the European Court of Justice impose a daily penalty payment of €148,177,000 and 92 cents on the UK. So the UK has to pay that, and it will claim it back from Northern Ireland. So it's a reminder again that if you don't do it, that's a lot of money per day to be sacrificing. So, but I'm happy to take questions on any of these other bits and pieces.
Could I ask a question?
Yeah, certainly. Just very quickly, Ian, the negotiations on the EU budget are happening now. I'm just wondering if you've got any intelligence on how that's progressing.
They're literally happening now. In fact, the meeting today is happening, and there is a lot of speculation on what that will look like. Ground will have to be given, I think, is the reality. The tension is basically between those who are net contributors to the budget and those who are net recipients to the budget. And as you can appreciate, there is some concern at the moment that, as I was pointing out in this note, the things which we think are important, like infrastructure projects, like Connecting Europe, like the Horizon 2020 project, could all be sacrificed as the member states solidify their support for CAP. France has determined that the CAP should not fall. Now, if the CAP, which is 40% of the budget, or just about 40% of the budget, does not fall, and you cap the budget or you reduce the budget, what has to give? And the fear is that it will give in the things which actually the EU could most do with investing in. One might contend, although the French might disagree. So you will get a full report on that at the next meeting. And that's why I give you this little taster just now, because I was thinking I'm not going to know enough or picked up enough to be able to give you a full rundown of that.
Okay, thanks for that. Jamie McGregor.
Two things. The first is that I noticed that the cap on enormous farms, which are receiving huge amounts of subsidy, is going to obviously save an enormous amount of money, I would imagine. Is that going to go back into the CAP pot, as far as you know?
If they adjust because the top level figure is what comes out of the multi-annual financial framework discussions. That's the top figure that's set. Then after that, the allocations are sorted out. So if less money is being spent on one particular aspect of farming, that remains within the overall allocation for farming, and it can therefore be spent in different areas. Yes.
The other point I think it will be important to a lot of hill farmers is the fact that the report determined that farms with under 10 hectares of arable should be exempt from the greening policies, which I think that will affect a lot of Scotland.
There's been great moves again. You will remember when this was being discussed earlier, the big move was to make this a green cap, to make it very green. But in so doing, they were seemingly imposing restrictions and rules that would have caused a lot of bureaucracy for very small farmers who don't really have the capacity, time or effort.
It seems as though they sort of listened for one.
It does, absolutely. It does. Yeah.
Lord Campbell?
Can I just discuss Plan B for a minute? I think I understand that only about 1% of all the pesticides used in Scotland are neonicotinoid, if that's the right pronunciation. What's the likelihood of the expert committee, because I understand there's still a divergence of opinion actually agreeing this and the Commission then bringing this ban into action by the 1st of July? Is it still contentious, or is it your view it's likely to go through?
Will go through. You're quite right, it's a very limited pesticide in Scotland, very big in England, however. And there's no doubt that the UK government is lukewarm in pushing this one forward. But there is also a wider recognition that across Europe that bees are an integral part of the farming world, and therefore there needs to be something done. And the work that's being done, the research there is a body of research now that suggests there's a link. And so yes, this is because it's going to, if you like, an expert group. It's going in a very different way. So it doesn't have to go through all of the hoops that legislation would normally follow. So there is every possibility that this could be adopted by the summer. And the idea being in time for the bee season, if that makes sense.
Okay. I see we should recognise actually that there has been an increase in the published figures on gender balance of women on boards in publicly listed companies. It's risen from 13.7% up to 15.8% in January 2012. Apparently this represents the highest year-on-year figures, and I see that the conversations about the minimum objective is 40% or 40% is still ongoing. I think we should just recognise that there has been a slight rise there, but also to recognise that 25% of the EU's largest companies still have no female representation. And I do believe it's something we should keep highlighting.
Yes, absolutely. You'll recall from previous discussions that the desire to make this a stronger legal base for progress wasn't warmly welcomed across the EU, so it became a far less strong push. But nonetheless, the figure is still, 15.8% being the highest is commendable, but it's not that high, really, compared to what they expect it should be, which is 40%. So, they would need to double the highest figure they've ever had in order to get to where they think would be a sensible place to be. So, a lot of progress yet to be made.
Of work. The only other thing that I've got from the Brussels Bulletin is to recognise that Latvia have passed the law to adopt the euro, and really just to applaud their optimism and wish them well, I think. Rod.
No, I just wondered whether, without dabbling too much in Latvian domestic politics, is the fact that Estonia is in the euro a consideration?
Yes, it probably is a consideration. I think Estonia was one of all the Baltic states had planned to join broadly about the same time. Yeah. Estonia had made greater progress before the financial crisis appeared on the horizon. The other Baltic states slowed down at that point their energies toward pushing it forward. Estonia was already within the Eurozone. I think it's because Latvia is now, its economy is very successful. It is showing significant growth, and it is now feeling it's ready to adopt a currency that will help it into the wider markets. So I think they are ready. And you're right, there's a lot of intra-Baltic competition to push these things forward.
Just on that issue, is Croatia with the euro or not with the euro yet?
Not yet, but it's committed to...
no, it's with the EU, but not with the euro.
No, it's not. Joins the EU in July.
It's the 1st of July.
Yes. Croatia's arrival in the EU is the 1st of July. It's made a commitment to join the euro.
It does use the euro, though.
Yes, it does, in effect. But it's not formally...
But it's not using the euro at the moment.
It does. It does.
It's an informal...
I've been to Croatia. It does use the euro.
They've still got their own yuan, haven't they?
But they're not members of the EU, but they do use the euro. Yeah.
It's one of these sort of... The Baltics have unusual currencies.
They use both.
Yeah.
A number of countries use the euro who are not members.
Yeah. Well, they use both.
They use both, yeah.
There's some that use the dollar.
Yeah, Montenegro, when I was in Montenegro last year, I could have used a number of currencies and they were very receptive to them all. So.
Yes, they would like to use currencies which are worth something.
Yeah.
I think that's the reality.
Yes.
And it's a fully transferable currency, like the euro, the dollar.
Yes.
Should I dare I say sterling and the yen? Okay, is that everything on the Brussels Bulletin? Members content to pass it on to our relevant committees for their consideration, and just highlighting to the Rural Committee about the fisheries. point. Okay, moving on to agenda item 5, which is Horizon 2020, and we have a paper, quite a detailed paper. This is the first update from the Scottish Government after they had agreed to provide following publication of the committee's report on Horizon 2020 and 2012. Comments on the update, Helen?
Just say it was such a huge paper, convener. I think they were trying to drown us in paperwork. I think maybe we could return to it at another meeting, because I didn't get through reading all of it. I mean, I managed to read the other papers, but certainly not this one. It's such small print as well, so it takes a lot of digestion. So I mean, I think that maybe we could come back to that.
I think the discussion that I had with the clerks when we discussed this paper at the beginning of the week was that we should be thanking the Scottish Government for such detailed contribution. But yeah, you're absolutely right about maybe taking a more detailed look at it, but maybe suggesting that we have a more summarised version in the future.
I'm not complaining. I think it's wonderful that they're willing to give us this information, but you just can't digest it in the time from which we've received the papers to today, and it's not even digest, it's even be able to read it all. That's the reality. Yeah.
Well, maybe we should consider just getting another wee slot in a future committee to look at this paper specifically,
Yes.
and give people a bit more time.
Yeah.
Happy with that, yeah? Any other comments on the paper? Any comments from the clerks on the paper, Ian?
What we can do for a future meeting is bring you a more synthesised version of this. Yes, a summarised version. And what we will do, I think, with the next instalment from the government is suggest to them that they may wish to give us the more synthesised version in the first place.
So important, and it's so helpful to have it. So I'm not diminishing in any way or criticising anyone. I'm just saying the practical realities for us as members is that we've not had the time to read it all. So I would value the chance to have it at another meeting, yes.
Do that. So we'll agree to take that forward at future meetings. Yep. Okay, moving on to agenda item 6, which we agreed at the beginning of the meeting to take in private. Could I thank the members of the public for being here today and go into private session?